I was rushed to the hospital unconscious. The doctors called my parents, but they coldly replied, "We can't, our other daughter is walking her dog." Even after being told, "Tonight might be her last," they never came. A week later they finally showed up, but my bed was empty. On it was a single note. The moment they read it, the color drained from their faces. "My name is Sophia and I am 26 years old, and I still can't believe I woke up in a hospital bed, fighting for my very life, only to hear my parents tell the doctors they couldn't possibly come because my sister, Victoria, was out walking her dog." Can you even imagine? Even after the doctor warned them that night might be my last, they never showed. This wasn't just another instance of them choosing Victoria over me. It was a gut-wrenching, unthinkable betrayal, and I knew right then it would be the absolute last. Let me tell you about the letter I left behind that changed everything. Before I dive into this whole mess, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania. You know the kind, a house with a white picket fence, looked perfect from the outside. My parents, Harold and Diana Wilson, had 2 daughters. I was the oldest, and then Victoria came along 3 years later. And from the moment she was born, there was this unspoken, yet incredibly clear, difference in how my parents treated us. It was like a switch flipped. I was 7 when I won first place in the school's science fair. I still remember rushing home, that blue ribbon clutched tight in my hand, my heart just bursting with excitement to show my parents. They gave me a quick, almost distracted pat on the head before their eyes, and their full attention zipped right back to Victoria, who was in the backyard, waddling on her bike, learning to ride without training wheels. I told myself, "It makes sense, Sophia. Learning to ride a bike is a bigger milestone than a science project." I tried to rationalize it, even then. By the time I was 12, I had grown painfully accustomed to the pattern. When I brought home straight A's on my report card, my mother would nod approvingly, a quiet, almost reserved acknowledgement. But then she'd save her most enthusiastic, almost gushing praise for Victoria, who had somehow managed to get a B- in art. A B-. When I qualified for the state swimming championships, my father, looking a little uncomfortable, said he was proud, but he couldn't attend because Victoria had a minor cold and, apparently, needed him at home. I became an expert at making excuses for them, not just to others, but to myself. They were busy. Victoria was younger, so she naturally needed more attention. I was more independent, more resilient, I could handle things on my own. I convinced myself these were all perfectly reasonable explanations for why my achievements seemed to just vanish into thin air while Victoria got a parade for the smallest accomplishments. It was exhausting. What made things even more complicated, and honestly, terrifying, was my health. At 16, I was diagnosed with a severe autoimmune disorder. It wasn't just a cough or a sniffle. It required daily medication, constant vigilance, and regular monitoring. My condition could flare up from stress, certain foods, and especially animal dander. Even with this serious diagnosis, my parents seemed to treat my health issues as nothing more than an annoying inconvenience. When I had to miss school for doctor appointments, my mother would sigh heavily, a loud, dramatic sigh, about having to rearrange her schedule. When I had a full-blown reaction and needed to go to the emergency room, my father would complain about the medical bills on the drive over, making me feel like a burden, not a daughter in distress. Victoria, on the other hand, never had any major health problems. She was the picture of vitality, always energetic, always outgoing. She became a soccer star in high school. And my parents? They never missed a single game. Not one. They would sit in the stands with giant homemade signs, yelling her name, their faces beaming with pride. And I'd be right there beside them, often feeling dizzy or nauseated from a flare-up, but utterly determined to support my sister, despite my parents' crushing lack of support for me. As we grew older, the disparity in how we were treated became even more pronounced, a gaping chasm between us. When it came time for college, my parents told me, with completely straight faces, that they could only afford to help one of us financially. And because Victoria wasn't as academically inclined, she would, of course, need the support more. So, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, mind you. Meanwhile, Victoria dropped out after 1 semester because she found it too stressful. And my parents? They comforted her by buying her a brand new car. A brand new car. Despite all of this, This endless cycle of neglect and favoritism, I maintained hope. This desperate, stubborn hope that someday, my parents would see me. Really, truly see me. I kept trying to earn their approval, their attention, their love. I graduated with honors, secured a good job at a marketing firm, and even made sure to visit home regularly. I always brought thoughtful gifts for everyone, remembered all their favorite things, and went out of my way to be the perfect daughter. But no matter what I did, Victoria remained the sun around which our family orbited. Last year, after yet another holiday where I felt like nothing more than a polite guest in my own family home, I finally decided to create some much-needed space for myself. I moved to a city about 30 miles away, close enough to visit, but far enough to establish some independence, some sense of self. I found a nice one-bedroom apartment, continued excelling at my job, and started building a life that was not defined by desperately seeking my parents' approval. Victoria, now 23, still lived at home. She cycled through a series of part-time jobs, none lasting more than a few months. She spent most of her time shopping, going to parties, and meticulously curating her social media presence. My parents continued to support her financially and emotionally, acting as if this was perfectly normal for a woman in her 20s. The dynamic, already so skewed, reached a new, unbelievable level when Victoria decided she wanted a dog. Not just any dog, oh no. An expensive, purebred Samoyed that cost more than $3,000. And despite knowing about my severe allergies to animal dander, a condition that could literally send me to the hospital, my parents not only approved, but paid for the dog and all its ridiculously expensive accessories. They even converted their home office into a special room just for the dog, complete with custom furniture and climate control. When I expressed genuine concern about not being able to visit anymore due to my allergies, my mother simply said, with a dismissive wave of her hand, "You can take your medication, sweetie. Victoria really needs this dog for her emotional well-being." That right there was my family in a nutshell. Victoria's emotional well-being always trumped my physical health. Her desires always outweighed my needs. But still, they were my family, and some desperate, foolish part of me kept hoping that someday, things would change. I even maintained a good relationship with Victoria, despite everything. She was spoiled, yes, and self-centered, but I didn't believe she was deliberately malicious. She had simply grown up in an environment where she was the undisputed priority, and she honestly didn't know any different. Sometimes, when it was just the two of us, I could glimpse the sweet little sister I had built sandcastles with as a child. Those rare, fleeting moments kept me holding on, hoping that beneath the layers of favoritism and dysfunction, there was still a real family connection to be salvaged. Looking back now, with the cold, hard clarity of hindsight, I can see I was setting myself up for catastrophic disappointment. I was clinging to a fantasy version of my family rather than accepting the harsh reality of who they were and how little they truly valued me. But sometimes, fantasies are just easier to live with than brutal truths, especially when those truths cut straight to your core. I had spent 26 years of my life trying to earn the love that should have been freely given. It would take a near-death experience for me to finally understand that no amount of trying, no amount of achieving, would ever be enough. 3 months ago, after several weeks of minimal contact with my family, I decided to make one last, desperate effort to reconnect. I called my mother and suggested I come over for dinner that weekend. To my genuine surprise, she seemed excited about the idea and immediately agreed. "That sounds wonderful, Sophia. We haven't seen you in so long. I'll make your favorite lasagna, and your father will pick up that cheesecake you like from the bakery downtown." Her enthusiasm sparked a familiar, fragile hope within me. Maybe they had noticed my absence after all. Maybe they did care. I spent the rest of the week looking forward to Saturday, even splurging on a nice bottle of wine to bring along and a new outfit that I thought my mother would approve of. As Saturday approached, I made sure to take extra doses of my medication. My condition had been relatively stable lately, and I was determined to keep it that way for this family dinner. I also prepared mentally, reminding myself not to expect too much, to focus on enjoying whatever positive interactions occurred rather than dwelling on any disappointments. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, I was greeted by my mother's warm hug and the delicious, comforting smell of her homemade lasagna. For a fleeting moment, everything felt perfect. Then I heard a distinct bark from inside the house, and my heart sank like a stone. "Is Victoria's dog here?" I asked, already feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that preceded an allergic reaction. "Of course, Snowball is here. This is his home. My mother replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Victoria brought him back from her apartment this morning. She's staying the weekend. I hadn't even known Victoria had moved out, which, believe me, was a conversation for another time. Right now, I had a far more pressing concern. Mom, you know I'm severely allergic to dogs. I cannot be in the same house as Snowball for extended periods, even with medication. We talked about this when Victoria first got him. My mother's expression hardened slightly. Well, we can't just put him outside. It's too cold, and Victoria would be heartbroken. You'll be fine for one evening, Sophia. Just take another pill if you need to. Before I could respond, my father appeared in the doorway, grinning broadly. There's my girl. Come on in. Dinner's almost ready. I hesitated, standing on the threshold, caught between a rock and a hard place. I had brought wine, worn a new outfit, and built up all these expectations for a nice family evening. Walking away now would only cement my role as the difficult daughter, the problem child, who couldn't even make it through one family dinner without causing trouble. So, I stepped inside. Inside, Victoria was curled up on the couch with Snowball, a large, fluffy white dog who immediately started barking excitedly when he saw me. Victoria looked up from her phone long enough to give me a quick, dismissive wave. Hey sis! Look how big Snowball has gotten. Isn't he gorgeous? She buried her face in the dog's fur, completely, utterly oblivious to my growing discomfort, my tightening chest. I kept my distance, trying to breathe shallowly. He's certainly fluffy. I managed, my voice already a bit strained. I didn't realize he would be here tonight. Where else would he be? Victoria laughed. He's family. Those words stung more than she could ever know. A dog she had owned for less than a year was family, while I, their daughter of 26 years, was expected to risk my health to accommodate him. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I took another dose of my allergy medication and used my inhaler, already feeling the familiar burning in my throat. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, noting the hives already beginning to form on my neck, and gave myself a desperate pep talk. Just get through dinner, Sophia. Keep the peace. It's only a few hours. When I returned, we all sat down to eat. The lasagna was delicious, but I could barely taste it through my increasingly congested sinuses. The conversation, predictably, revolved almost entirely around Victoria and Snowball, his training progress, the cute things he did, the expensive organic food they had special ordered for him, and the dog's social events Victoria had been taking him to. Whenever I tried to contribute to the conversation, talking about my recent promotion or the night classes I had started taking to further my education, my parents would nod politely, their eyes glazing over, before quickly returning to the far more interesting topic of Snowball's preferences in chew toys. By dessert, my eyes were watering constantly, my breathing was labored, and I had broken out in angry, itchy hives across most of my visible skin. Victoria finally seemed to notice. Whoa, Sophia, you look terrible. Are you having a reaction or something? Yes. To Snowball. I wheezed, my voice barely there. I told Mom I'm allergic when I arrived. My mother frowned, a slight annoyance in her eyes. I thought you were exaggerating. You always were a bit dramatic about your health issues. I am not being dramatic, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my growing anger and discomfort. I have a documented medical condition. My doctor has specifically warned me about prolonged exposure to animal dander. Well, you seem fine enough to eat a full dinner and dessert, my father pointed out, as if my ability to eat somehow negated my very real medical distress. I think I should go, I said, pushing myself up from the table. Thank you for dinner, but I'm not feeling well. Already? But we haven't even had coffee yet, my mother protested. And I wanted to show you the new curtains in the living room. Another time, I said, gathering my purse, desperate to escape. I need to get home and take more medication. Victoria rolled her eyes, a gesture that spoke volumes. You're always so serious about everything, Sophia. It's just a little allergic reaction. Pop a Benadryl and chill out. I didn't bother responding to that. I thanked my parents again for dinner, declined their half-hearted offers to have me stay longer, and made my way to my car, my lungs burning with every labored breath. As I drove home, I could feel my chest getting tighter, my breathing more laborious. I stopped at a pharmacy on the way and bought additional antihistamines, swallowing them immediately in the parking lot, hoping for some relief. By the time I reached my apartment, I was utterly exhausted, both physically from the allergic reaction and emotionally from yet another family gathering where I felt utterly, completely invisible. I used my nebulizer, took a cool shower to soothe my hives, and collapsed into bed. As I drifted off to sleep, I told myself what I always did after these encounters. They didn't mean to hurt me. They just don't understand. Victoria is their baby. I'm stronger, more independent. I don't need their attention the way she does. But a small, persistent voice inside me whispered a different, much darker truth. They understood perfectly well. They just didn't care enough to change. And no amount of strength or independence could fill the gaping void left by parents who consistently chose someone else over you. I pushed that voice away and fell into a troubled sleep, unaware that this relatively minor incident was just the beginning of a health crisis that would ultimately force me to confront the painful reality of my family dynamic once and for all. 3 days after that disastrous family dinner, I woke up feeling like someone had parked a truck on my chest. My skin was burning, itching, covered in angry hives, and when I tried to stand, the room spun violently around me. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and called my doctor's office, leaving a desperate message about my symptoms and explaining about the dog exposure. This wasn't my first severe reaction, but it was definitely, terrifyingly, among the worst. Usually, the effects of allergen exposure would peak and then begin to subside after 24 to 48 hours. The fact that I was getting worse on day 3 was a red flag. I had an important presentation that day, one I had spent weeks preparing for. Missing it was not an option in my mind. I had spent my entire life pushing through illness, pushing through pain, to meet expectations, and today would be no different. As I drove to work, memories of previous health crises flooded my mind, a chilling montage of neglect. When I was 17 and had my first major autoimmune flare, I had been hospitalized for 3 days. My mother had visited once, for less than an hour, explaining that Victoria had a recital she couldn't miss. My father had called daily, but never came in person. He had said hospitals made him uncomfortable. When I had pneumonia during my sophomore year of college, I had been so sick I could barely walk to the bathroom. My roommate had called my parents, concerned. They had sent money for medication, but explained they couldn't come visit because Victoria was going through a breakup and needed their emotional support. Each time, I had told myself it was fine. I was an adult. I could handle being sick alone. I didn't need my mommy and daddy to hold my hand. But the truth, the painful, lonely truth, was that being chronically ill and having no family support was incredibly isolating and utterly demoralizing. By the time I reached my office, I knew I had made a terrible mistake coming in. My breathing was shallow and rapid, dark spots danced at the edges of my vision, and my head throbbed. My colleague, Natalie, took one look at me as I stumbled to my desk and immediately came over, her face creased with genuine concern. "Sophia, you look absolutely terrible. What is going on?" "Allergic reaction," I managed to explain between labored breaths. "Got exposed to a dog at my parents' house. Thought I could push through it." Natalie frowned, her eyes wide with worry. "You need to see a doctor right now. This looks serious." "I have a presentation," I protested weakly. "I'll cover your presentation," she insisted, her voice firm. "Your health is more important than any work meeting. Do you need me to drive you to urgent care?" I shook my head, touched by her concern, but still ridiculously reluctant to admit how truly bad I felt. "I'll call my doctor again. If they think I should come in, I'll get an Uber." Natalie looked skeptical, but returned to her desk after extracting a promise that I would keep her updated. I called my doctor's office again and was immediately put through to the nurse. After describing my escalating symptoms, she told me in no uncertain terms to go to the emergency room immediately. "This sounds like it could be developing into anaphylaxis," she explained, her voice urgent. "With your history, we cannot take chances. You need to be seen right away." I hung up and sat there for a moment, contemplating my options. Part of me, the old, desperate for approval part, still wanted to stay for the presentation, to prove I could push through anything. But another part, the rational part that had been silenced for far too long, knew this was serious. Dangerously serious. I gathered my things, my hands shaking, and approached Natalie's desk. The nurse said I should go to the ER. My voice was barely a whisper. "Could you let Brian know I won't make the presentation?" "Of course," she said, already reaching for her purse. "I'm driving you. You should not be alone right now." I tried to protest, but she was insistent. And honestly, I was relieved. As my condition had deteriorated throughout the morning, a growing, icy sense of fear had been building inside me. Something was very wrong, and the thought of facing it alone was terrifying. As Natalie drove me to the hospital, I decided to call my parents. Despite everything, they were my family, and a small, hopeful part of me still believed that in a true emergency, they would finally be there for me. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a brief, concise message, explaining that I was having a severe reaction and heading to the hospital. I tried to keep my voice steady, not wanting to sound dramatic, but also desperately hoping they would understand the sheer seriousness of the situation. Next, I tried calling Victoria, thinking she might be able to reach our parents if they weren't answering their phones. "Hey, what's up?" she answered, the sound of her dog barking loudly in the background. "Victoria, I'm having a really bad reaction," I explained, my voice growing weaker, fading. "I'm on my way to the hospital. I can't reach Mom and Dad. Sorry, he's trying to eat my shoes. Yeah, I'll tell them when I see them. They're taking me and Snowball to that new dog park today. Victoria, this is serious," I emphasized, fighting for breath. "I need them to know I'm going to the hospital now." Okay, I'll text them. Gotta go, Snowball is destroying my favorite sneakers. Feel better." And with that, she hung up. I stared at my phone in stunned disbelief. Even now, with me heading to the emergency room, with my life hanging by a thread, Victoria and her dog remained the absolute priority. I slumped back against the car seat, fighting back bitter tears of frustration and soul-crushing hurt. "Family?" Natalie asked sympathetically, her eyes reflecting my shock. "Something like that," I muttered, my voice thick with unshed tears. By the time we reached the hospital, I was struggling to stay conscious. My throat felt like it was closing, my airway narrowing, and the hives had spread to the point where my entire skin felt like it was on fire. Natalie helped me into the emergency room where the triage nurse took one look at me and immediately, frantically, called for assistance. What followed was a blur of frantic activity. I was rushed into a treatment area, given injections of epinephrine and steroids, and hooked up to various monitors. Doctors fired questions at me about my medical history, my exposure to allergens, and my current medications. I tried to answer as best I could, but I was fading in and out of awareness, the world around me blurring into a painful haze. The last clear memory I had was of calling out for my neighbor, Mrs. Garza, asking her to feed my cat. Mrs. Garza, the elderly woman who lived next door to me, had no connection to the hospital and was certainly not there. But in my confused, fading state, I was concerned about my pet being alone. Then darkness claimed me entirely. I later learned that as my condition worsened, the hospital staff had made multiple, urgent attempts to contact my parents. They had finally reached them around 6 p.m., some 4 agonizing hours after I had been admitted. The conversation, as it was relayed to me later by a nurse who had been present, went something like this. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, this is Mercy General Hospital. Your daughter Sophia has been admitted with a severe anaphylactic reaction. Her condition is critical, and we strongly recommend you come immediately." "Tonight?" my father had apparently replied, his voice annoyingly casual. "We cannot possibly come tonight. Our other daughter is walking her dog at that new park across town, and we need to pick her up afterward. Sir, I do not think you understand. Your daughter is in critical condition. The doctors are doing everything they can, but her organs are starting to show signs of stress. Tonight might be her last night. You really should be here." There had been a long, chilling pause before my mother spoke, her voice utterly devoid of panic. "Well, we can't just leave Victoria stranded with her dog. Surely Sophia will stabilize soon. We can come by tomorrow if she's still there." The nurse, bless her heart, had apparently been so shocked by their callous indifference that she could barely respond. "I will note in her chart that you were informed of her condition," she had finally said, her voice tight with disbelief, before hanging up. As I drifted through varying states of consciousness, I was vaguely aware of voices around me, of machines beeping, of hands gently tending to me. At one point, I opened my eyes to see a nurse holding my hand. She was older, with kind eyes and gray hair peeking out from her cap. "You hang in there, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice a balm to my raw soul. "I'm staying right here with you." I squeezed her hand weakly in response, a silent thank you, grateful for this stranger's profound compassion when my own family had abandoned me once again. Throughout that night, my condition remained critical. My body was essentially at war with itself, my overactive immune system attacking my own tissues in response to the prolonged allergen exposure. The medical team worked tirelessly, adjusting medications, monitoring my vital signs, fighting to keep me alive. By morning, I had stabilized somewhat, though I remained in the intensive care unit. The immediate crisis had passed, but the damage to my body, and even more profoundly, to my heart, had been done. Natalie, my incredible colleague, had contacted some of my other coworkers, and throughout the next day, a steady stream of familiar faces, colleagues and friends, came to visit. They brought flowers, cards, and most importantly, genuine concern. People I saw every day, but had never considered truly close friends, showed up and sat with me, sharing stories, and keeping my spirits up. Not once did my parents call to check on my condition. Not once did Victoria text to see if I was still alive. As the brutal reality of their absence sank in, something inside me finally, irrevocably broke. The fantasy I had clung to for 26 years, the desperate, flickering hope that deep down my family truly loved me, finally shattered completely. In its place grew a strange, cold sense of clarity. For the first time, I saw my family exactly as they were, not as I wished them to be. And with that clarity came the beginning of a plan, the letter that would change everything. The first 72 hours in the hospital remain mostly a blur in my memory. I have flashes of consciousness, the cold rush of medication entering my veins through the floor, the constant beeping of monitors, the squeak of the oxygen mask covering my face. What I remember with perfect clarity, however, is the gut-wrenching moment I fully regained consciousness and realized no one from my family was there. I opened my eyes to the sterile white ceiling of the intensive care unit and turned my head, half expecting, against all reason, to see my mother in the chair beside the bed. Instead, there was a young nurse checking my vitals. "Welcome back," she said with a warm, gentle smile when she noticed I was awake. "You gave us quite a scare." "My parents?" I asked, my voice a painful rasp. Her smile faltered slightly. "I don't believe they have been in yet. Would you like me to try calling them again?" That was when the full, devastating reality hit me. I had nearly died, and my parents had chosen not to come because Victoria needed help with her dog. I had known they favored her, but some part of me had always, foolishly, believed that in a true life-or-death situation, they would be there for me, too. That belief had been the last fragile thread holding together my image of us as a real family. Now that thread had snapped, irrevocably. "No," I said after a long, choked moment. "Don't call them." The nurse, whose name badge read Ellie, seemed to understand something of what I was feeling. She gently patted my hand. "You have had other visitors, though. A woman named Natalie has been here every day, and several other friends have stopped by. They've been very concerned about you." I felt tears, hot and bitter, sliding down my cheeks. Colleagues and casual friends had shown more care for me than my own parents. The contrast was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Throughout that day, as my condition stabilized enough for me to stay conscious longer, I learned more about what had happened. Dr. Rivera, a specialist in immunology, came to explain the severity of what my body had gone through. "You experienced a particularly severe biphasic anaphylactic reaction," she explained. "The initial exposure to the allergen triggered the first phase, but then your body seemed to recover slightly before launching into a much more severe second phase. This is why you felt worse days after the exposure rather than immediately. Your autoimmune condition complicated matters, essentially creating a perfect storm in your system." "Could I have died?" I asked, needing to hear the unvarnished truth. Dr. Rivera looked me directly in the eyes. "Yes, Sophia. Without prompt medical intervention, this type of reaction can be fatal. The fact that your symptoms progressed over days rather than hours actually made it more dangerous, as many people would not seek help until critical organ systems were already compromised." She went on to explain that I would need to stay in the hospital for at least another week while they monitored my recovery and adjusted my medication regimen. The extended dog exposure had triggered such a severe response that my entire treatment plan needed to be reconsidered. As the day progressed, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Natalie visited during her lunch break and filled me in on what had happened after I lost consciousness. "The emergency room staff called your parents multiple times," she said, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. I was still there for the first call, and I could not believe what I was hearing. "The doctor literally told them, 'You might not make it through the night, and they said they couldn't come because Victoria needed help with her dog. I nearly grabbed the phone to scream at them myself. She went on to tell me that she had stayed at the hospital until late that night, only leaving when the nurses assured her I had stabilized. She had returned the next morning before work and had been checking in daily since then. Other colleagues had organized a rotation so someone would visit me at least once a day. We all pitched in for the flowers, she added, gesturing to a beautiful arrangement beside my bed. And Brian said to tell you not to worry about the presentation. He rescheduled it for when you're back. I was completely overwhelmed by their kindness. These people, who had no obligation to me beyond professional courtesy, had stepped up to support me in ways my own family never had. As evening approached, Ellie came back to check on me. She had a strange, almost cautious expression on her face. Your parents called the nurses' station, she said hesitantly. They wanted to know your condition and said they might come by tomorrow. Might. I repeated the word, tasting bitter in my mouth. I can make sure they are updated on your condition if you would prefer not to see them, she offered, and I realized she had picked up on my distress. I was silent for a long moment, processing the turbulent emotions churning within me, anger, hurt, profound disappointment, but strangely, also a growing sense of resolve. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my relationship with my parents with complete, crystal clarity, stripped of the desperate hope and endless excuses I had always made for them. If they come, I finally said, my voice steady, I don't want to see them yet. Please tell them I'm resting and cannot have visitors. Ellie nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding. Of course. That night, as I lay awake, listening to the rhythmic sounds of the hospital, I made a decision. I would use this time, this forced pause in my life, to finally address the toxic dynamic that had shaped my entire existence for 26 years. I would write a letter of final communication to my parents, laying bare the truth of our relationship and establishing the boundaries I should have set long ago. The next morning, I asked Ellie for paper and a pen. She brought them without question, along with a small lap desk I could use in bed. As my strength slowly returned over the next few days, I worked on the letter, pouring out decades of hurt, disappointment, and finally, my unshakable decision to prioritize my own well-being. During this time, the contrast between my biological family and the incredible community that had formed around me grew increasingly stark. Natalie continued to visit daily, often bringing small comforts from home or updates from work. Other colleagues stopped by with books, magazines, and conversation that helped distract me from the physical discomfort of recovery. Mrs. Garza, my elderly neighbor, whom I had called out for in my delirium, actually did come to visit after Natalie tracked her down to check on my cat. She arrived with homemade soup in a thermos, and stories about how my cat was doing, having taken it upon herself to care for him in my absence. I have 5 children and 12 grandchildren, she told me as she sat beside my bed, her eyes twinkling. But none of them live nearby. We look out for each other, you and I. That's what neighbors should do. Even Dr. Rivera went beyond professional requirements, spending extra time explaining my condition and treatment options, answering all my questions with patience and genuine respect. When I mentioned my parents' refusal to come, she didn't offer platitudes or excuse their behavior. That must be incredibly painful, she said, simply acknowledging my hurt without minimizing it. Sometimes the families we create in life are more important than the ones we are born into. Her words stayed with me as I continued to work on my letter. By the 6th day of my hospitalization, I had completed it, a 4-page, handwritten document that represented both an ending and a beginning. I sealed it in an envelope that Ellie provided and waited. On the 7th day, as I was starting to prepare for discharge, Ellie came into my room with news. Your parents called again. They said they are definitely coming to visit this afternoon, around 3. She paused, her gaze steady. Would you like me to tell them you are not receiving visitors? I took a deep breath, feeling strangely calm, a quiet resolve settling over me. No, I said. I want you to let them come. But I won't be here. She looked confused. Are you being discharged this morning? Yes, I said, having already discussed my release with Dr. Rivera. But I have a favor to ask. When my parents arrive, could you give them this? I handed her the sealed envelope. And could you place it on the bed so it looks like I left it there for them to find? Ellie looked at the envelope, understanding dawning in her eyes. Of course, she said softly. I can arrange that. By 2:30 that afternoon, I had been officially discharged. Natalie had picked me up and was waiting with me in a small coffee shop across from the hospital. From where we sat, tucked away yet with a clear view, I could see the hospital entrance. At precisely 3:15, I watched my parents walk through those doors, finally coming to see their daughter after she had nearly died a full week earlier. I didn't know exactly what would happen when they read my letter, but I knew with absolute certainty that our relationship would never be the same again. And for the first time in my life, that thought did not fill me with dread, but with a profound, liberating sense of freedom. Natalie's spare bedroom became my sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a pet-free building with large windows that let in abundant natural light. It was the perfect environment for my physical recovery, free from allergens and full of fresh air and sunshine. Stay as long as you need, she insisted when I expressed concern about imposing. I live alone and have plenty of space. Plus, I enjoy the company. The first few days after hospital discharge were focused entirely on regaining my physical strength. I slept for 12 to 14 hours a day, my body demanding rest to heal from the trauma it had endured. Dr. Rivera had prescribed a new medication regimen that required careful monitoring, and Natalie helped me keep track of the various pills and injections. As my body slowly recovered, my mind began the equally important, and perhaps more daunting, process of healing from decades of emotional neglect. The letter I had left for my parents had been a watershed moment, a clear, unmistakable line drawn between the person I had been, desperate for their approval, and the person I was becoming, determined to value myself, even if they never would. The contents of that letter had poured out of me during those hospital days. Each word a release of pain I had carried for far too long. Dear Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I will have been discharged from the hospital where I spent a week fighting for my life. The doctors called you the first night and told you I might not survive until morning. You chose not to come because Victoria needed help walking her dog. This was not the first time you have chosen Victoria over me. It has been the pattern of our family since my earliest memories. For 26 years, I have made excuses for your behavior. I have told myself that Victoria needed you more, that I was stronger and more independent, that someday you would see me and value me equally. I nearly died waiting for that day to come. I do not write this letter out of anger, though I have every right to be angry. I write it from a place of clarity and self-preservation. I can no longer participate in a family dynamic that consistently places my needs, my accomplishments, and even my life below those of my sister, and now, her dog. From this point forward, I am stepping back from our relationship. I need time and space to heal, not just from this most recent health crisis, but from the lifelong pattern of being treated as less than. I will not be contacting you for the foreseeable future, and I ask that you respect my decision by not attempting to contact me either. If at some point you are genuinely interested in building a healthier relationship, one based on mutual respect and equal consideration, then we can revisit this decision. That would require acknowledgement of the harm that has been done and a commitment to change on your part. I do not hold out much hope for this outcome, but I leave the door unlocked rather than sealed shut. Not for your sake, but for mine. Because despite everything, letting go of the dream of having parents who truly see and value me is the hardest thing I have ever done. I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing it to save myself. Sophia. I had no way of knowing how they had reacted upon reading those raw, honest words. Part of me had expected frantic phone calls or even a visit to Natalie's apartment, whose address they could have obtained from my building manager, but there had been nothing. Complete silence, which in its own way, was the most telling response of all. A week after my discharge, I began seeing a therapist named Lydia, whom Dr. Rivera had recommended. Our first session was primarily focused on the immediate trauma of my health crisis and family abandonment. But as the weeks progressed, we began to dig deeper into the insidious patterns that had shaped my life. What you are describing is a classic golden child/scapegoat dynamic, Lydia explained during our third session, her voice calm but firm. Families with this pattern typically elevate one child, the golden child, as the repository of all their positive projections, while using another child, the scapegoat, as the target for all negative projections. But why? I asked, a fresh wave of old hurt washing over me. What did I ever do to deserve being the scapegoat? Nothing, Lydia said firmly, looking me straight in the eye. This has nothing to do with anything you did or didn't do. This dynamic develops from the parent's own unresolved issues and insecurities. The golden child makes them feel good about themselves as parents because that child's dependency validates their importance. The more independent child often becomes the scapegoat precisely because their self-sufficiency threatens the parent's sense of being needed. Her explanation struck a deep chord, resonating with every single childhood memory, every ignored achievement, every dismissed illness. My entire life, I had believed that if I could just achieve enough, be perfect enough, somehow earn their love, things would change. But the truth was that my very strengths, my independence, my resilience, were what had made me the target of their neglect. The most insidious aspect of this dynamic, Lydia continued, is how it trains the scapegoat to constantly seek approval that will never come. You have been running on a hamster wheel of achievement and self-sacrifice, hoping to finally win the love that should have been freely given to you as their child. So, what do I do now? I asked, feeling both liberated by this new understanding and utterly lost. You grieve, she said gently. You acknowledge the parents you deserve but never had. You feel the anger, the sadness, the profound loss. And then, gradually, you build a life based on your own values, your own worth, rather than the desperate hope of finally being seen by people who have shown they are incapable of truly seeing you. Those sessions with Lydia became the foundation of my healing process. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full range of emotions about my family without immediately dismissing them or making excuses. I cried for the little girl who had brought home achievement after achievement, only to be ignored. I raged at the parents who had chosen a dog over their daughter's life. I mourned the family I had always wanted but never truly had. Alongside this emotional work, I began the practical process of rebuilding my life. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, I felt strong enough to return to my own apartment. Mrs. Garza welcomed me home with another container of homemade soup and updates about my cat, who had apparently decided that her apartment was an acceptable second residence. He still comes to visit me every afternoon, she said with a chuckle. I think he's decided we are family now. Her casual use of the word, family, made me smile, a warm, genuine smile. Perhaps family was not defined by blood or legal ties, but by who showed up when it mattered. As I settled back into my apartment, I made several significant changes. I invested in high-quality air purifiers for every room to reduce the risk of allergen exposure. I updated my emergency contacts, removing my parents and adding Natalie and, after asking her permission, Mrs. Garza. I even changed my advanced medical directive to specifically state that my parents should not be consulted for medical decisions if I was incapacitated. 3 weeks after my discharge, I felt ready to return to work. My colleagues welcomed me back with genuine warmth, and Brian, my supervisor, assured me that my position had been secured during my absence. Take it easy your first week back, he advised. Your health comes first. The work will still be here. His consideration, so different from what I had experienced from my family, reinforced my growing understanding that respect and care should be normal, not exceptional, in relationships. Throughout this time, I maintained my silence with my parents. Victoria had texted once, a casual, "Hey, how are you feeling?" as if I had had a minor cold rather than a life-threatening medical emergency. I had responded with a brief, "Recovering, thanks," but did not elaborate or invite further conversation. My parents had finally called 4 days after reading my letter. I had let the call go to voicemail. My mother's message was short and strained. "Sophia, this is your mother. We got your letter. I think you are being very dramatic about this whole situation. Your father and I have always done our best for both you and Victoria. Call us when you are feeling more rational." Her words, so dismissive of my near-death experience and the legitimate pain I had expressed, only confirmed that I had made the right decision in stepping back. There was no acknowledgement of their failure to come to the hospital. No recognition of the pattern I had described. Not even a simple, "I'm sorry you felt that way." As the 4th week of my recovery began, I received a surprising call from Victoria. "Mom and Dad are acting weird," she said without preamble when I answered. "They won't tell me what was in your letter, but they've been fighting a lot and Mom keeps crying at random times." "What did you say to them?" "I told them the truth," I replied simply. "About how they've treated me compared to you for our entire lives. About how they chose not to come to the hospital when doctors said I might die because you needed help with your dog." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice was subdued, almost small. "I didn't know it was that serious. They just said you were having an allergic reaction, and would be fine. Would you have done anything differently if you had known? I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Another pause. I don't know, she admitted, a tremor in her voice. I guess I've never had to think about it before. Things have always revolved around what I want. Her honesty was surprising, and in its way, refreshing. That's not your fault, I said. That's how they raised you. But I can't be part of that dynamic anymore. It nearly killed me, literally. Are you saying you don't want to be my sister anymore? There was a hint of the little girl I had once built sandcastles with in her voice, a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. No, I said softly. I'm saying I need to rebuild my relationship with myself first. I've spent my whole life trying to earn love from our parents by being perfect, achieving everything, never complaining. It has left me hollow inside. I need to learn who I am when I'm not desperately seeking approval. I didn't know you felt that way, Victoria said. You always seemed so together, so strong. That was the mask I wore, I explained. But underneath, I was drowning. Our conversation ended shortly after with no real resolution, but perhaps a small, hopeful crack in the facade of our family dynamic. I didn't know if Victoria would reflect on what I had said or immediately dismiss it. I didn't know if she would report back to our parents or keep our conversation private. For once, I decided not to worry about any of that. Their reactions were their own responsibility, not mine. As I prepared for bed that night, I stood before my bathroom mirror and really looked at myself. The physical toll of my health crisis was still visible in my too thin face and the lingering shadows under my eyes. But there was something else there, too. A new steadiness in my gaze that had not been there before. The desperate need for approval that had driven me for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by something quieter, but far more powerful, self-acceptance. The journey ahead would not be easy. Decades of unhealthy patterns could not be undone in a few weeks. But for the first time, I was facing that journey not as the family scapegoat seeking redemption, but simply as Sophia, a woman worthy of respect, consideration, and love exactly as she was. The day my parents finally came to the hospital only to find my empty bed and that letter was a pivotal, earth-shattering moment in all our lives. Though I was not physically present to witness it, what I know about their reaction comes from Ellie, the nurse, who had become something of an unexpected ally during my stay. She called me the day after my discharge, having gotten my number with my permission before I left. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, she said. I just thought you might want to know what happened when your parents arrived. I did want to know, though part of me feared the answer. Please tell me. They came right at 3, like they said they would, Ellie recounted. I directed them to your room and told them you had been discharged earlier that day. Your father seemed annoyed, asking why no one had called to tell them. Your mother went straight to the bed and saw your letter. According to Ellie, my mother had picked up the envelope with my name written on the front in my distinctive handwriting. She had called my father over, and they had opened it together, standing side by side at the foot of the empty hospital bed. I gave them privacy, Ellie continued, but I could see them through the window in the door. I have never seen someone's expression change so dramatically. Your father's face turned red, then almost purple with rage. Your mother went completely white, like all the blood drained from her face at once. She sat down on the bed about halfway through reading, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. When they had finished reading, my father had crumpled the letter in his fist, then immediately smoothed it out again as if regretting the impulse. My mother had simply sat there, staring at nothing, completely broken. They stayed in that room for almost 45 minutes, Ellie said. Not talking much, just sitting there. When they finally left, your mother was crying, and your father looked like he had aged 10 years in an hour. I listened to this account with a strange detachment, as if hearing about strangers rather than my own parents. Their reaction suggested my words had hit home in a way I had not entirely expected. Perhaps for the first time, they were seeing our family dynamic through unclouded eyes. Thank you for telling me, I said to Ellie, my voice thick with emotion. And thank you for everything you did for me during my stay. You're welcome, she replied warmly. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You deserve it. Those words, you deserve it, echoed in my mind long after we hung up. Did I deserve care and consideration? The rational part of me knew the answer was yes. But decades of being treated as less than had left deep grooves of doubt in my psyche. In the days following my conversation with Ellie, I braced myself for an onslaught of calls, texts, or even a visit from my parents. I had arranged to stay with Natalie temporarily, both to recover and to give myself space from potential confrontations, but the expected barrage never came. Instead, there was only silence, broken by the single text from Victoria that I mentioned earlier. The silence continued until 6 days after reading my letter. My parents finally called. I let the call go to voicemail, not yet ready to engage directly. My mother's message, dismissing my experience as dramatic and suggesting I was being irrational, confirmed that they were not yet capable of the honest reflection our relationship would require to heal. There was no acknowledgement of their failure to come to the hospital. No recognition of the pattern I had described. Not even a simple, "I'm sorry you felt that way." 2 days after that call, I received a lengthy email from my father. Unlike my mother's dismissive voicemail, his message showed at least some attempted introspection. "Sophia, your letter has forced your mother and me to confront some uncomfortable truths about our family. While I do not agree with everything you wrote, I cannot deny that we have not always been as attentive to your needs as we should have been. The night the hospital called, we genuinely did not understand the severity of the situation. We have become so accustomed to you handling everything on your own that we assumed this would be no different. That was our mistake, and I am sorry for it. However, I believe you are being unfair in your characterization of our entire relationship. We have always been proud of your achievements and independence. Perhaps we did not show it in the ways you needed, but that does not mean the feeling was not there. I hope you will reconsider your decision to cut us off. Victoria misses you, and despite what you may believe, so do we. Dad." His words reflected the beginning of awareness, yes, but they stopped far short of true understanding. The line about being proud of my achievements, without acknowledging that they had never bothered to attend my graduations, presentations, or other milestone events, spoke volumes. His assertion that they did not understand the severity of a situation where doctors explicitly said I might not survive the night revealed how deeply ingrained their dismissal of my needs truly was. I did not respond to the email. Instead, I forwarded it to Lydia, my therapist, and we discussed it in our next session. "This is actually quite typical," she observed. "There is acknowledgement of the specific incident that triggered the confrontation, but resistance to seeing the larger pattern. Note how he says you're being unfair in your characterization, essentially telling you that your lived experience is incorrect. Should I respond?" I asked. "That depends entirely on what you want from this interaction," she replied. "If you are hoping for full acknowledgement and change, this email suggests they are not there yet. If you want to maintain some connection while establishing boundaries, a brief, neutral response might be appropriate. If you truly need complete space right now, silence is a valid option." After careful consideration, I decided to send a brief reply. "Dad, thank you for acknowledging that you should have come to the hospital. That means something to me. However, this is not about one incident. It is about a lifelong pattern that nearly cost me my life. I need time and space to heal both physically and emotionally. I hope you can respect that. Sophia." Short, direct, and maintaining my boundary while acknowledging his small, hesitant step toward understanding. I did not receive a reply. As the weeks passed and I settled back into my apartment and work routine, the silence from my parents continued. Victoria, however, began to reach out more frequently. Her texts evolved from casual check-ins to more thoughtful inquiries about my recovery and eventually, tentative questions about our childhood. "Was it really that bad for you growing up?" she asked during one phone call, about a month after my hospital discharge. "I always thought you were so impressive." "That was the outside," I explained. "Inside, I was constantly striving to be perfect enough to finally earn Mom and Dad's attention and approval. Do you remember my high school graduation? I was valedictorian, but Mom and Dad left right after the ceremony because you had a minor cold." "I do remember that," she said slowly. "I didn't even have a fever. Mom just said I looked peaked and needed to rest." "And my college graduation? They missed it entirely because you had a date that night and needed help choosing an outfit." "I had forgotten about that," she admitted, her voice small. "When you put it all together like that, it does sound really bad." These conversations with Victoria were complicated. On one hand, she had been as much a product of our dysfunctional family system as I had been, just playing a different role. On the other hand, she had undeniably benefited from that system at my expense for our entire lives. I tried to balance honesty about my experience with the understanding that her awakening to the reality of our family dynamic would be its own painful journey. 6 weeks after my hospital discharge, when I was fully back at work and settling into my new normal, the confrontation I had been both expecting and dreading finally occurred. My parents showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday afternoon. I saw them through the peephole and considered not answering, but after taking a deep breath and centering myself, I decided to face them directly. I opened the door, but did not invite them in. "Sophia," my mother said, her voice wavering slightly. "You look well. What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, firmly in control. "We need to talk," my father said, stepping forward. "This has gone on long enough. You cannot just cut your family out of your life because of one misunderstanding." The minimization of my near-death experience, my agonizing week in the ICU, as a misunderstanding, sent a flare of pure, hot anger through me. But I kept my expression calm, my voice steady. "This is not a good time. If you want to talk, you need to call first and respect my boundaries." "Boundaries?" My mother scoffed, her voice rising. "Need permission to see our own daughter?" "Actually, you do," I said firmly, my voice unwavering. "That is exactly what a boundary is. I asked for space in my letter, and showing up unannounced at my home is disrespecting that request." "This is ridiculous," my father huffed, his face reddening. "Victoria said you've been filling her head with all sorts of accusations about us being bad parents. We have done everything for you girls." "I have only told Victoria the truth about my experience," I replied, holding their gaze. "If that conflicts with the story you have told yourselves about our family, that is something you need to examine." My mother's face crumpled. "How can you be so cold? Do you know how much you have hurt us with all this?" The familiar guilt, that lifetime habit of taking responsibility for their feelings, began to rise in me. But I pushed it back down, crushed it. "I nearly died, Mom. Alone in a hospital, because you and Dad chose Victoria's dog over coming to be with me. I am not responsible for your feelings about that reality." They continued to push, using every tactic that had worked in the past: guilt, obligation, dismissal of my experience, appeals to family loyalty. But something had fundamentally changed in me. The desperate need for their approval that had driven me for so long had been replaced by a clear-eyed understanding of my own worth and the treatment I deserved. After 15 minutes of circular conversation that was getting nowhere, I finally said, "I'm going to close the door now. Please do not come back unannounced. If you want to talk, call or email first and respect my answer if I say I am not ready." "This is not over," my father said as I began to close the door. "You are right," I agreed, my voice strong. "This is just the beginning of me valuing myself enough to set healthy boundaries. Goodbye." I closed the door, then leaned against it, my heart racing, but my resolve firm. For the first time in my life, I had stood my ground with my parents without being consumed by guilt or the desperate hope of finally earning their approval. Moments later, my phone buzzed. It was Victoria. "Mom and Dad came home really upset. Dad keeps saying you have changed. Mom is crying in their bedroom." "What happened?" I replied simply. I stood up for myself. "It is new for all of us." Her response came after a long delay. "I think I need to learn how to do that too." Those words, so unexpected, gave me the first real hope that something truly positive might emerge from this painful upheaval. Not a fantasy reconciliation where my parents suddenly became the loving, supportive people I had always longed for, but perhaps a healthier relationship with my sister, and new, healthier patterns for both of us going forward. The letter I had left on that hospital bed had indeed changed everything. Not by magically transforming my parents, but by finally giving me permission to transform myself, from a perpetual people-pleaser, desperate for approval, into a woman who knew her own worth and was no longer willing to accept crumbs of affection where a feast of love should have been. 6 months have passed since that day I left the letter on my empty hospital bed. 6 months of healing, growth, and profound change. I sit here in my new apartment in a different city, 40 miles from where my parents still live, reflecting on how much has shifted both around me and within me. The physical reminders of my near-death experience have faded. The last of the hives disappeared weeks ago, and my breathing has returned to normal. My new medical regimen, carefully designed by Dr. Rivera, has kept my autoimmune condition stable. I still have to be vigilant about potential allergen exposure, But the constant anxiety that once accompanied that vigilance has subsided, replaced by a quiet confidence. Moving to a new city was a decision I made 2 months after my hospital stay. I needed a fresh start, somewhere without the shadows of old patterns clinging to familiar corners. My company was supportive, allowing me to transfer to a different branch office. The apartment I found is on the top floor of a newly constructed building with state-of-the-art air filtration systems, perfect for someone with my health concerns. What has been most remarkable about this time is discovering how many people were ready to step up and become my support system when I finally created space for them in my life. Natalie visits every other weekend, and we have developed a friendship that goes far beyond our original work connection. Mrs. Garza and I speak weekly by phone, exchanging recipes and stories. She reminds me of the grandmother I never had. I've made new friends in my new city, joining a book club and a hiking group for people with chronic health conditions. These relationships are different from any I had before. Without the desperate need to please that had colored all my previous interactions, I have found myself capable of authentic connections based on mutual respect and genuine care. My relationship with my parents and Victoria has evolved in ways both expected and surprising. My parents and I maintain minimal contact. They call once a month, and I answer when I feel emotionally equipped to handle the conversation. These calls are brief and somewhat superficial, but they no longer leave me feeling drained and inadequate. I have accepted that they may never be capable of the deep, nurturing relationship I once craved. And strangely, that acceptance has freed me from the constant disappointment of unmet expectations. Victoria, however, has undergone a transformation I never anticipated. 2 months after my hospital stay, she moved out of our parents' house and into her own apartment. She even rehomed Snowball with a family friend who had a large yard and children who adored him. I realized I never actually wanted a dog. She confessed during one of our increasingly frequent calls. I just wanted Mom and Dad's attention, and they always gave me whatever I asked for. It wasn't fair to Snowball or to you. That level of self-awareness from my previously self-absorbed sister shocked me to my core. When I asked what had prompted this change, her answer was both simple and profound. Your letter. Not the one you left for Mom and Dad, but what you told me about having to be perfect to try to earn their love. It made me look at myself and realize I'd been doing the same thing, just differently. I was being the dependent, needy daughter because that got me their attention, but it was making me into someone I don't actually want to be. Victoria and I now meet for coffee once a month. Our relationship is still healing, still finding its new shape, but there is an honesty between us that never existed before. We are learning to be sisters without the distorting lens of our parents' favoritism. Therapy continues to be a cornerstone of my new life. Lydia has helped me understand that the healing process is not linear. There are still days when the old habits of thinking try to reassert themselves. Days when I catch myself overachieving to prove my worth or minimizing my needs to avoid being difficult. But now I recognize these patterns for what they are. Echoes of a dynamic I have chosen to leave behind. One of the most powerful lessons I have learned is about the true nature of family itself. Blood relationships are given to us by circumstance. But true family, the people who show up, who value us, who respect our boundaries while supporting our growth, we choose and create through our actions and commitments. The nurse who stayed past her shift to hold my hand when I was fighting for my life showed more family loyalty than the parents who chose a dog walk over their daughter's bedside. Natalie, who drove me to the hospital and visited daily during my recovery, demonstrated more care than the sister who couldn't be bothered to relay an emergency message. Mrs. Garza, who fed my cat and brought me soup, embodied the neighborly concern that is its own kind of family bond. My near-death experience clarified, with brutal efficiency, what truly matters in relationships. It is not shared DNA or legal ties that make a family. It is not grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It is the consistent choice to show up, to see the other person fully, to respect their needs and boundaries, to care about their well-being as much as your own. I have learned that forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation. I have forgiven my parents for being unable to give what they themselves probably never received. I understand that their treatment of me likely stems from their own unhealed wounds and limitations. But that forgiveness does not obligate me to continue participating in a dynamic that caused me immense pain and nearly cost me my life. Perhaps the most profound lesson has been about my own worth. For 26 years, I believed that if I could just achieve enough, sacrifice enough, be perfect enough, I would finally earn the love and attention that should have been freely given. I now understand that my value as a human being was never something I needed to earn. It was my birthright all along. The letter I left on that empty hospital bed was not just a goodbye to a toxic family dynamic. It was a hello to a new way of being in the world, as a woman who knows her worth, who sets healthy boundaries, who chooses relationships that reflect rather than diminish her value. If you are watching this and recognize yourself in my story, if you are the family scapegoat, the overlooked child, the one who has spent your life trying to earn love that should be freely given, please know that you deserve better. Your worth is not determined by others' recognition of it. You do not need to achieve perfection to be worthy of care and respect. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to stop trying to earn love from those unable to give it freely, and instead direct that energy toward building a life and relationships that honor our true value. If my story has resonated with you, thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.